Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed. I'm Arjuna, and this is the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. Today, you'll be seeing my discussion with Chaitanya Charan on the Israel-Hamas conflict. Unfortunately, I had a few tech issues with the recording, so my video was missing for most of the recording because we had some tech issues with Zoom, and then I forgot to hit record on the camera that was just my video. So we've just got his video, and I've just edited up a picture of me and a little graphic to make it so it's not too boring. And we also lost about 15 minutes at the end of the discussion, so I asked Chaitanya Charan to record another section of closing statements, so you'll be seeing that. So here is the recording. Today we're going to be doing something we haven't done before, which is covering a political issue. We're going to be talking about the Israel-Hamas conflict. But we're going to try and not be political about it. We want to discuss the theological, ethical considerations relating to the issue. So if you think we're getting any of the facts wrong, don't worry about it. We're not claiming to be scholars in all the facts of the issue. We're happy if you want to disagree with us on the facts, but the principles that we're going to discuss will apply if the facts are true or in other situations where similar scenarios are happening. So my guest today is Chaitanya Charan. He's a great scholar and speaker on Vedantic topics. He's a bit of a wizard with words. He likes to do lots of alliteration, and he does lots of classes and writes a lot on Gita quotes and so on. So Chaitanya Charan, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Arjun. Wonderful to be here with you once again. And I've been seeing some of the podcasts that you're doing. It's a diverse range of topics and a lot of penetrating discussions. So
Right,
it's a pleasure to be of some assistance in your service.
Yeah, cool. So the reason I wanted to cover this topic is because, at least as far back as I can remember in my short life, I'm now 33, in the West, mainstream views have been that war is bad, terrorism is bad, I guess with a few exceptions, like there were a lot of people who are pro going into Afghanistan and so on. But typically, and it's always been the case that mainstream views have held that terrorism is bad. But recently with this Hamas conflict, I've seen university professors, people living in Western countries protesting in favor of actions that are just outright blatant terrorism. And that bothers me. And I think we should be able to all condemn actions that include blowing up children, blowing up civilians and so on, without needing to add any caveats. You know, if you need to say, oh yeah, blowing up babies is bad, but then I think something's gone wrong in our humanity. We should just be able to say these things are blanket bad. So yeah, I think this is worth talking about for those reasons. Do you want to say anything on that?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, this is a very volatile topic at one level, but another level, I am also not just puzzled, but you could say almost shocked at the level of support or justification of the extremism that is coming up. Now, there are two issues over here. See, one thing is that even if we don't support any particular side, but if we look at it from the perspective of the three modes that the Bhagavad offers, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, that Sattva refers broadly to clarity, and we are trying to clarifying what is the actual issue over here. Rajas is where we are craving for power, craving for position, possessions, and Tamas is where we are complaining, and complaining can lead to further things where we end up destroying the other person or destroying ourselves. So these are broadly, the Bhagavad Gita says, these are like three gears in which the human mind can function. A car in a particular gear will move in a particular way. So these are three gears in which the human mind functions broadly. And complaining, grievance, which can eventually lead to vengeance. Everybody has grievances in the world, but some people think that I just want to destroy the people who have hurt me. That's vengeance. And vengeance can go further down to malevolence, where people start thinking that not only I want to destroy this person who hurt me, but I just want to destroy anyone and everyone. So that is an extremely dark place to be in. So I fully understand that people can have grievances. And when there is grievance, then vengeance, while it may not be the desirable thing, it's at least understandable. Yeah, they did this to you, so you want to do this to them. But from vengeance to go down to malevolence, where I want to hurt anyone and everyone, uh, even if that particular person has not hurt me, that is an extremely dark place. So this capacity to differentiate between these three stages, I think that is what is getting lost. So killing children, killing babies is a downright malevolence. And if we humans can come up with a justification for malevolence, well, those people who are there into that, they will come up with justifications. But if others start supporting and justifying that, then that is a ghastly place. So I would say this is indicating of a very dark mode of ignorance where the presence of grievance is used to justify malevolence. The grievance has to be rectified, no doubt about it. But just because there is grievance, one start justifying malevolence, and that's very dark tamoguna. The Bhagavad Gita in 16:9 says that such a vision will end up destroying the world.
Yeah, the Tamagun point I think is very relevant. I recall hearing in the antebellum South, so post Civil War in America, like the north part of America was more productive, but the old like hillbilly, so on. There was this writer who went to traveling down there and recorded observations here. They had this kind of pride that didn't make any sense because they had nothing to be proud about. And one example that's particularly stark and kind of captures it is a man contracts another man to build a house for him. And no progress is made on the construction of the house. So he finds somebody else to build the house for him. So when the second man finds out that he was contracted to build the house, but now that contract's been given to someone else, his pride has been hurt. And so now he gets out his guns and his friends, and they go around and fighting over it. Where his pride was hurt, but nothing had happened. And I mean, I guess I've listened. Previously I pretty much knew nothing about the subject, and then I thought, okay, I want to do a podcast. I've listened to a lot of podcasts and documentaries covering the subject, and I think both sides have genuine grievances. And I'd also like to point out that the grievances on both sides are probably caused by the extreme fractions of the other side. So I think on both sides, you've probably got reasonable parties that just want to live their lives in peace, or they're upset, but they don't want to deal with it in the worst way. But I think in this particular conflict, it's the worst parties that are setting the trend of how it's dealt with. So Israel and their defense, they're having to respond to the most extreme elements of the Palestinians. And the Palestinians have had to deal with their fair share of persecution and as well.
Yes. Talking about this tamoguna, the mode of ignorance, one of the characteristics is that it creates a victim mentality. Krishna talks about in the Gita in 1835 that when one wallows in self-pity and complaining and blaming, all these are characteristics of not just the mode of ignorance, but Krishna calls it intelligence in the mode of ignorance. That means the intelligence is used to justify and rationalize. And now sometimes when we use the word rationalize, just topic we're discussing. See, when we rationalize, often we end up telling rational lies. So we end up telling rational lies when we rationalize. So we use our rationality to justify what is being done. So this is what the Gita calls as intelligence in the mode of ignorance. Now, one tragic characteristic of this, which is manifesting at a huge societal level, in today's world is that the world is conveniently divided into the victimizers and the victims. This division itself is problematic at one level because we all at some level may be victims and we all may be victimizers also. But here it is assumed that whoever is powerful is the victimizer and whoever is the weaker side, that is the victim. Whoever is now, it could be true, but doesn't have to be necessarily true like that. So the victims somehow are always considered virtuous and victimizers are considered vicious. So this is where this default assumption, yeah, it is true that people in power can misuse their power, but it is not that victims are always virtuous. So that's why the point is that even if somebody is killing babies, and not just killing babies, that's one thing, it's celebrating the killing of them. And they're broadcasting it with a bloodthirsty glee, I would say. And that is being supported. Now you may say, oh, we don't support that. We just support the cause. Okay, but that cause is being expressed in a particular way. So this idea of constantly celebrating the victimizers, constantly celebrating the victims, and assuming that those who are in power are the victimizers always. That's not necessarily true. If you consider the British rule of India, it was clear that in the British rule, I don't need to write this. In the British rule of India, it was clear that the British exploited India. They plundered India of so much wealth. And that is not just true about India. Colonialism has had its terrible consequences all over the world. But if you consider, the British were in minority and the Indians were the majority, but the minority were ruling the majority. The minority were exploiting the majority. So who was the victim? Who was the victimizer? Just because somebody is a majority, the majority is one way of saying that a person is powerful. But somebody can be in majority and that person can still not have power. The British had had especially military power. They had gunpowder, which tilted the scales drastically in their favor. But apart from that, the principle is that there has to be nuance in the discussion, and nuance doesn't mean that we justify malevolence. That is a very dark place to be, the mode of ignorance. And coming to the specific issue, as you rightly said, we are not experts in this field, and we're not focusing on the historical specifics of the details. But even if there are grievances, the grievances have to be resolved in reasonable ways. This is far from reasonable. This is outrageous what has been done. So now, as you said, extremism, just to respond to that last point, in general, among any demographic, there is a small number of people who are extremists, but often they have the loudest voices. And when they act, and they become the voice of the entire community, they take over that voice, and that's where the problem comes up. So the extremism is again a example of destructive tamoguna. So the hope for a solution lies in these extremist elements being curbed, and those who are moderate elements, they rising on both sides and trying to come to a workable solution. So that happens in Sattva-guna, more or less.
Just on that point of people saying, oh, we don't support that, but we support the cause. I think what needs to be added to that consideration is, like, none of us know how to solve this conflict. You know, if it was that easy to solve, that some people in the West who haven't studied it that much would have a solution, it would have been solved already. But what we can do is be calling for the right thing. You know, like, I don't know how to solve the problem, but I really wish they could find a way of peacefully coexisting and do that without much bloodshed. You know, I wish the violence could end, and they could just find a way to peacefully coexist, or I don't know why they're so upset with having the exact pieces of land that they're fighting over. I guess that, it's Jewish holy land, and is it Islamic holy land too?
Jerusalem is the holy place for three religious traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So now the fight is over Jerusalem, but it has gone way beyond that. It is, in one sense, religion is is more a rationalization or justification than a reason for the fight. It has become that there is this common conception that religion causes wars, and yes, religion could be one cause of the war, but uh, actually, if religion were the cause of war, then all the places where there are no religion, they would have been the most peaceful places in the history of the world. But we see that was tried out. Atheism was the official position of the red countries, Soviet Russia and China. And the result was the opposite of paradise. It was hell on earth. 100 million people were killed in those two countries without any war being fought. That's more than World War I and World War II combined. So atheism has been no picnic at all. And I'm not saying atheism is the cause of war also. That's
Yeah.
simple. The simple point I'm making is that to blame religion for this is not just an oversimplification, it's a distortion.
That
So that's, yeah.
the Sam Harris response to that would be, oh, but when those atheistic worldviews are creating those problems, they're doing so due to having adopted religious elements such as, blindly following and all that sort of stuff. And so then they still blame it on religion. But I think we can just condemn the bad elements and say, even if religion has blind following of that nature, that's also bad. And if atheism has it, then it's bad too.
So extremism is not the monopoly of religion.
Yeah.
So the Gita talks about some very intriguing concepts where it uses oxymorons. It has this concept of knowledge in the mode of ignorance. Normally, we consider knowledge and ignorance to be opposites. The more knowledge increases, ignorance decreases. But knowledge in the mode of ignorance, it says, is that we know one thing, we equate one thing with everything. As they say, if somebody finds that, oh, with a hammer I can fix a nail, then that person starts thinking that everything in the world is a nail that I can hit with a hammer. So that is fanaticism, that is extremism. And extremism can come in religion, extremism can come in atheism, extremism can come with any ideology, in fact. So extremism is the basic idea that what works for me is the only thing that will work for anyone else. And anybody who doesn't agree with this is not just wrong, but wrong-headed and wicked. So that idea, if you can consider among the new atheists, also this idea is there that anybody who is not an atheist is condemned. And not all of the new atheists are like that. But I would say that when any worldview becomes totalizing and demonizing, totalizing means we have an exhaustive understanding of all of reality. All of reality fits into these categories which we have designed. And all people in that category are, as I said, not just wrong, but wrong-headed and wicked. They are demonized. And that leads to horrendous results. So when this barbarism in the form of shooting babies in cold blood is done, that is the ideology of extremism, which is asserted that just because somebody is born in that particular religious tradition, that means that person doesn't even deserve to live, even if that person is just a baby. So extremism is, you could say, it's a worldview, it's an ideology, and that can infect any religion It can infect atheism. It can infect anyone. So rather than saying that atheism is adopting religious characteristics, it's like extremism is a third thing associated with the mode of ignorance. And this extremism is like a dark spirit or a deadly ghost that can infect a religion and that can infect atheism also.
There's a AI, there's a thing called the AI paperclip problem. Have you heard of it? So there's this fear that basically the exact same psychological phenomenon you described and the exact same pathology. People fear that AI could do something like that. If we just created an AI and said, just create as many paperclips as possible, if that AI got sufficiently powerful and just was myopically focused on that one thing, it could level cities and just go around destroying the entire planet to make as many paperclips as possible. So, and an example I thought of while you were talking is the green movement. We got to reduce our carbon emissions. So in the UK, they've got these protesters, Extinction Rebellion, and they'll block roads in order to protest. We should need to stop burning fossil fuels. And there's a video where a mum's like, "My baby's in there. I need to get the baby to the hospital. Let me go." And the protesters screaming back, saying, "No, we need to save the planet."
What kind of people are you?
Illegal. Move the car, somebody's going to the hospital.
This woman has a real newborn baby, guys.
You make more pollution. Somebody's going to the hospital. It's illegal.
The planet's more important. And I don't think it, to anyone who's not totally gone in the ideology of the green movement, that should just seen as like blatantly, like almost evil thing to do, right? To prevent a mother from taking her sick child to the hospital.
It would have been a comical example if it had not been so horrible. What it is. How could a sane person do something like that? That quote which is attributed to religion, that applies to extremism. Who is that? He said, good people will do good things and bad people will do bad things. But so the quote is that religion can make good people do bad things. But I would say it's not religion, it's extremism.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, one of the characteristics of a spiritually evolved person that the Bhagavad Gita says, in fact, it talks about wisdom in terms of 20 qualities. And it says the first characteristic of wisdom is humility. And humility is, in one sense, the doorway to the house of wisdom. And humility, it can have two aspects. We can talk many things in this, but in terms of knowledge, that no matter how much I know, there is much more to know, and what I don't know may be more important than what I know. So if we consider humility from that perspective, then that humility will lead to a certain level of comfort with uncertainty. That comfort with uncertainty, that, yeah, maybe this is not so clear for me. This is not so black and white. So all these people are terrible. That level of black and white is a terrible thing. So now we could have this black and white kind of categorization both ways. So the extremists, the terrorists who went about and killed babies, they have an absolute certainty about what they're doing. Now, of course, if the other side takes and all the people who not only killed them, not only who killed, but also every single one who supported them, every single one who's associated with that group, if all of them are also seen similarly, or they're all evil, then again, that would be a problem. So I think this whole idea that if we just have a little more humility, and then there is a little uncertainty, things are not that black and white, then extremism can be avoided. And if extremism can be avoided, then much of the violence that happens in the name of ideology, that can be minimized. So what is that? I think Victor Hugo said it, the problem with the world is that the wise are full of doubts and the foolish are cocksure. So, so now the foolish being confident or overconfident or absolutely arrogantly certain, that is a dangerous thing.
Yeah, atheists are like to go around and say that believing that God has told you to do something is incredibly dangerous, because if somebody thinks God's told me to go and kill that person, there's nothing you can do to convince that person otherwise, because you're not God. They don't believe, you can't counter God's word in their mind. But the atheists aren't quite narrowing in on the problem here. I've mentioned this lots on the channel, so if you watch much of my stuff, you'll have heard me say this. But what they're missing is the problem here isn't thinking God has sent you a message. The problem is thinking you've perfectly understood the message. And also the idea that a perfectly loving being would tell you to go and blow up babies is totally inconsistent. It's a contradiction to think that a loving God would support evil actions. So it also comes to this thing of, if, believing that God exists is fine, but if you believe God is evil, that's a dangerous ideology, because if you think God is evil, then you'll think God wants you to do evil things, and then you might go and do them.
There is, within at least the broad Vedic tradition, there is a check and balance system. Nobody can claim that God has spoken from within to me, and therefore I just know the absolute truth. There is Guru Sadhu Shastra. One has to consult spiritual teachers. One has to look at wisdom texts, and one looks at the lineage, the living community of wise people. So basically, no one person can claim to have an absolute revelation which leads them to dismiss everybody else. So that's one check and balance. Yes, and as you rightly said, that God, to that God can speak to humans. Okay, that's definitely possible. Who can stop God from speaking to humans? But God speaks to us in many different ways. So if we have an innate conscience, innate moral sense, and if we are believing that something from within is telling us to just violate that sense indiscriminately, then maybe that is not the voice of God. That is, the Gita is very clear that multiple voices within us, and the mode of ignorance, when it also becomes ossified within us, when it becomes calcified, solidified, then it doesn't become weak, rather it becomes stronger, and it can impersonate the voice of God also.
I think another important point is, to add to the Guru Sadhu Shastra point, is there's particular qualities that are externally observable in the Guru and in the Sadhu. So it's not just anyone who's quoting a scriptural book that you take as an authority on God's word. The person needs to be seen to be in the mode of goodness at minimum. And a person in the mode of goodness isn't going to be fueled by vengeance or malevolence like you were talking about. They're not going to be having this us and them mentality. There's Bhagavad Gita 5:18 where Krishna says that a spiritually advanced person, a Brahmin, sees all living entities equally. A cow, an elephant, a dog eater, a learned and gentle Brahmana. Yeah.
In the Gita, there are two distinct kinds of characteristics that are indicated of those who are spiritually evolved. One is their devotional characteristics about how they relate with God. And they like to sing songs in the glorification of God. They remember the divine. That's one side. But the Gita emphasizes a lot the behavioral qualities. So for example, in 12:13 to 20, the Gita describes what are the qualities that endear a person to God. And there it is said that such a person is the well-wishing friend of everyone. Such a person is, yes, that one who is not disturbed by others, and one who does not disturb others. Such a person is very dear. So these behavioral qualities in terms of how we can live amicably in relationship with others are extremely important. And if the so-called people who claim to have revelation, if they are not manifesting these behavioral qualities, then their claims to revelation are not just seriously suspect, they need to be rigorously rejected.
Yeah, and the Bhagavatam, some qualities are mentioned too. In
Tikshava
11.
Karunika Surda Sarvadehinam Ajata Shatravasanto. It's very similar qualities, that tolerance, compassion, non-inimical attitude, peacefulness. These are the ornaments of the saintly. Yes, so they're very similar.
The verse I'm thinking of is 11:242, Bhakti Pareshano Bhavo Viraktir. That just as a
Okay.
person engaged in the process of eating experiences three things simultaneously, their hunger goes away, there's pleasure in eating, and they gain energy, they get nutrition. Similarly, a person advancing in God consciousness experiences three things simultaneously. They become detached from material things. They have some experience of the divine. And what was the third one?
They actually tushti pushti shatapayo. Basically,
Oh, bhakti.
they
They have some devotion.
bhakti is awakened in their heart. Yes.
And so detachment is something you can observe too. You know, somebody who's like, they always want to have the latest iPhone, or, you know, they're worried about keeping up with what their neighbor has or whatnot. You can see when someone is detached versus that.
And, with detached also, there is, in this context, one has to be detached from imposing one's own ideas of one's own solutions at all costs. That there are problems in the world, and detachment doesn't mean we are indifferent to the problems. But in solving problems, a certain level of detachment means that, okay, I'm trying to do this. If it doesn't work, that does not mean I have a right to go to extreme means for solving problems. Detachment means that we understand that there are grievances, and grievances will be solved, but they may take some time. And during that time, one needs to be patient. So, the healthier trajectory, I talk about the unhealthy trajectory, grievance to vengeance to malevolence. You could have a healthier trajectory which goes upwards. From grievance, there is tolerance. Yeah, things will be resolved, but things may take time to resolve. And we see this in the example, saintly characters across the theistic traditions of the world. They go through tribulations, and just because they are facing tribulation doesn't mean that they become vengeful, they become hateful, they become malevolent. They're patient. Patience is not being passive. Tolerance is not being not weak and letting people walk over us. It just means that maybe things, that just because problems are not being solved doesn't mean that I have a right to blow up everything. And by that tolerance, one comes to a level of transcendence where one evolves spiritually, and one comes up with a better vision and a better solution to problems from that transcendental perspective. So, if we look at the idea of persecution, there are examples which you also mentioned in our pre-podcast discussion about how the Pandavas, they are the virtuous princes who persecuted by their cousins, the Duryodhana and his brothers. And they were attempted to be poisoned. One of the leading members was attempted to be poisoned. Then all of them were attempted to be burned alive while they're sleeping in a palace. They kept a low profile. They managed to escape. They didn't passively let themselves get burned. Managed to escape, but eventually they came back, and when they were supposed to be given their inheritance, they were just given unfairly half of the kingdom. That was utter wilderness. But what they did was they converted it into such a flourishing kingdom. It became one of the best. It became the monument that at that time many other kingdoms came to see. It became a marvel basically. So we can, if we are having that tolerance, non-vengeful attitude, then we can create something of beauty, something of glory. We humans have that potential. So we could say to some extent, Israel has done that. Now, this is not in any way supporting the specific position of Israel in this particular all. It is not definitely not endorsing any and every action that Israel does. But the point is, after the Holocaust, it was a horrible situation, and Israel made something wonderful out of it. So that is laudable. So now, can the Arabs also do something similar with the Hamas? Well, definitely with not with the Hamas, with the Palestine, or by putting aside the Hamas and those extremist tactics. And yes, that is what one of the greatest hopes in human history is the enduring capacity of human beings to rise above adversity. So the universe, we can say, is a university of adversity. Everybody faces problems in life. And either we can learn and grow and move from adversity towards prosperity. It can be external, it can be internal. Or from adversity, we go down to atrocity. Because bad has happened to me, so I will do worse things to others. So those are examples where, and this is one example from the Mahabharata, which is India's the classic spiritual epics. But I would say that similar examples can be found in other traditions also. And if we take those examples where we work toward a solution rather than try to destroy everything on the other side, because no satisfactory solution has come about.
Yeah, there's lots of examples from of like self-help stories where somebody was treated terribly, something bad happened to them, and they were spiraling down in some negative headspace of like vengeance or malevolence or whatever. And then at some point they decided, this isn't serving me. This isn't taking me where I want to go. And they just decided, I want to go somewhere else. And they just turned their life around and forgave the people that did something, whatever it was to them, moved on and made their life successful. So similarly, yeah, from what I've listened to, it sounds like Israel has had some interest in having their land and the Arabs having their land, and just went and built some wealth and made it happen. But because they built wealth so well, then the Arabs wanted to come and take it or something. But they built wealth well, and then a lot of Arabs came and immigrated and wanted to live there because there was economic development. And again, anyone can say I'm getting the facts wrong. That doesn't interest me. It's just a principle here. And the Pandavas were a great example of that. They went and built a flourishing kingdom when they had so many things unjustly taken from them and were just given this little piece of land that was barren wilderness. And that was sort of given to them like out of malice, like, oh yeah, go have this terrible piece of land, and they made it flourishing. And I think some of the Jews, they went to occupy bits of land that I think the Arabs were nomadically passing through it here and there, but they weren't farming it. So the Jews went and farmed it, and that created conflict. But no one was farming it before that. They went and created economic development. So it'd be nice if the Arabs did that too. Of course, I listened to the conflict on the other side too, and it sounds like the Israelites did lots wrong too.
In this world, nobody is. The world doesn't leave anyone with untainted hands, you could say.
Yeah.
Everybody has some guilt. The Gita gives the example that just as fire is covered by smoke, every endeavor is covered by fault. So there will always be some problems, but that doesn't mean that just because we can't have a perfect solution, doesn't mean that we just resort to destruction. So the world, now this Gita teaching that the world will always have problems this sometimes can be taken as a justification of the status quo. That this world is, as the Gita says, dukkhalaya. But that is not the mood of the Gita. Even in Buddhism, there is the idea that this world is dukkha is one of the truths. But it's significant. It said that dukkha is a noble truth. Why would distress be considered to be a noble truth? Because once we accept that distress is unavoidable in the world, then we can focus on making something worthwhile even in the presence of distress, rather than simply complaining about the distress. That is why we often have to settle not for solutions, but for trade-offs. And we don't have to live in pain, but we may have to live with pain. So sometimes I just want to eradicate anything and everything that causes pain. But that attempt to solve problems by eradicating the entire cause of pain, that leads to sometimes far greater pain. So extremism is the idea that this is the cause of my pain, these group of people. So therefore, all of them need to be destroyed. But the big problem with extremism is, okay, this is my group and this is the other group. And that group is to be eradicated. Why? Because they have some ideas different from what I have. Okay, even if I succeed in eradicating them, tomorrow in my group, some people will have ideas different from my ideas. Then will I eradicate people from my own group also? And then where will this eradication stop? We see this in extremism, often extremism associated with Islam. Now, of course, there's a fringe. But if you see Islamic extremists, they're not just destroying people from other religions. Often they target people from their own religion, from Islam itself, just because they are from a different sect within Islam. So this idea that because there is grievance caused by that thing, I will eliminate that entire thing entirely. That is itself a toxic mentality. So rather than seeking solutions as final solutions, we need to recognize that there will be trade-offs. And once we start with that basic acceptance, there will have to be trade-offs, then we can move forward towards creating something good, even in the presence of something bad.
Yeah, I think one important consideration is that what we shouldn't be focusing on, well, which side's right here or which side's wrong. What we should be looking at is individual elements within each group. So I quite like this idea that the peoples, like the Christians that are similar to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, have more in common with me, or like especially it's probably more true of like say the Abrahamic traditions, like the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians that are a particular sects that have lots in common with one another will have more in common with someone who's a Muslim or a Christian, if they're a Jew, than they will from people within their own tradition who differ from them. So I don't think these distinctions of what religion somebody's following are so important, because there's so much variation within those religions. People in the mode of ignorance, people in the mode of goodness, people with the bhakti focus, people with a more impersonal focus, that it's more important to just focus on the individual elements. So similarly with Hamas is a terrorist organization. So even if you think you're pro-Arabs, pro-Palestine, you should be able to condemn Hamas because they're just terrorists. Like, that's not the way to do it. And similarly with your pro-Israel, you should be able to find elements of things Israel has done historically or is currently doing that you don't agree with, because they're not going to be perfect. And I think it's better if we just, have this nuanced perspective where instead of having this black and white us versus them, where it's actually just looking at the specific features and focusing in on that.
Yes, definitely. And I think that is a good good note to reflect on a little bit more, that there are extremist elements everywhere, and there are people who support them, people who just refuse to oppose them, and there are people who oppose them. So now extremists, there are two approaches to this. That is, those who are solutions have to come both by a confrontational and a non-confrontational means. That a confrontational means is where those who are extremists, they may never learn by any language except the language of force. So confrontational methods are sometimes required. But if confrontational methods are all that is adopted, then things will only become worse. So along with that, there is non-confrontational method. In Sanskrit, there are two words, Shastra and Shastra. So Shastra is weapons and Shastra is wisdom. So weapons and wisdom both are required in solution. So we could say that corresponding to the three modes, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, humans can be characterized in three broad categories. Again, these are not watertight categories, but there are people with goodness, there are people with weakness, and there are people with wickedness. So goodness, weakness, and wickedness. Now, people with wickedness, they are unlikely to learn by discussions. Any kind of discussion, any kind of peace efforts, they will see it simply as appeasement. And they will take that opportunity only to become stronger and hit harder in the future. That's what happened, for example, with Victor Chamberlain and Hitler's Nazi expansion before the Second World War started. So those with wickedness, there is no point trying to make peace with them. For them, Shastra, weapons are required. But there are many who have weakness. Weakness means they are not themselves bad, but they don't have this enough strength to stand up to the bad. And there are people with goodness who will stand up against the wicked, will stand up for a virtuous cause, no matter what the cost. So those who are wicked, those with wickedness, they have to be curbed through force. But those with weakness, they gradually need to be removed from the influence of the wicked and brought under the influence of those with goodness. And this is, if you see the Ramayana war that is described in the climax of another epic, like the Mahabharata, Ramayana, another epic. So there was a wicked being, Ravan, who had been terrorizing people and violating women, and he had been basically a monster. So when Ram fought against Ravan, there was wickedness, and Ravan was given enough opportunity, but he refused to reconcile in any way. So with wickedness, there has to be a confrontational approach. But once that was done, Ram did not consider that all of Lanka is guilty because they didn't stand up in opposition to Ravan. No, Ravan was too powerful. They couldn't stand up. So, but there was somebody who stood up. There was Vibhishan, Ravan's own brother, who had the courage to go against him. And then what Ram did was that he empowered Vibhishan to become the next king. He didn't annex the kingdom. He didn't certainly annihilate the kingdom just because you people did bad things to me. But then once a person in goodness came in power, and those who are having weakness, they can gravitate toward wickedness if that's what are the kind of people under whose influence they come. But if they are governed and guided by a person with goodness, those with weakness can also rise towards goodness. So that's where the non-confrontational approach is also important, to connect with those who have virtue, those who are in the mode of goodness, you could say Sattva-guna, and lead them forward. So that's the hope, and we could say that's the prayer. There is maybe on a note which could be a concluding note, that there is a prayer which says that in the Bhagavatam, that may everyone find peace by rising towards goodness and godliness. So at least goodness, if more and more of humans rise toward that, people from both sides connect on that level, then there is, we could say, some hope for the future.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that Ram empowered one of their own people. Like, we've seen it so much where American foreign policy has has a pretty dismal track record, and it's like, oh, we're going to go to these countries and give them a Western style democracy, and then they have elections and they just elect another dictator, and it's worse than before. It turned out that the guy that the Americans removed was actually, sure, he wasn't great, but he was better than the next guy. This unfortunate situation takes place, but it's like there's two ways I've noted down that the left and the right each have a different style of having bad foreign policy. So the right, they want to go and give everyone democracy. There's a bumper sticker, watch out or we'll give democracy to you. And whereas the left, and that doesn't work so well, because the liberal, modern liberal Western style democracy works in a country that's populated by people who adopt a certain set of values. And in a country that's populated by people with different values, it's not going to work. So something else will be a better system for that place. And maybe we don't know what that is, but maybe what they've currently got, but just like a less extreme version of it, is like the next best step that we can move towards. And just the idea that we can solve all the world problems just by making them like us is incredibly naive, because the rest of the world is not like us. Actually, there's this acronym they use in social science called WEIRD. It's like white, European, I can't remember all the letters in the acronym, but it's basically just like Western white people. And they're like, all the social science studies analyze people living in Western countries. And then if you compare people living in Western countries to like every other culture on the planet, we're more different than everybody else. So the acronym WEIRD is quite fitting there. So what works in a Western country is probably not going to work anywhere else. And then the left messes up foreign policy by thinking the underdog's always right. If someone's the underdog, they must be right. Actually, a point I wanted to touch on earlier, which you brought up, where it's like we're kind of talking about the pathology of too much conflict and like too much like going out there and just being prepared to do harm in order to try to bring about a good result. But then the other extreme is I'm seeing it recently. I've got a customer that they manufacture lifts that go up and down that they use for putting luggage on and off planes. And those are sent to America, to UK, to Australia. So they're bringing money into the country, and then New Zealand Health and Safety comes along and shuts them down because even though you've been doing this for 60 years and you haven't had a fire, the way you're spray painting isn't up to current New Zealand standards, so we're going to shut you down. And I was talking to one of the guys working there. I don't know if he's an owner or manager, and he was saying Australia doesn't have a manufacturing sector because the health and safety laws are just too extreme that it's impossible to run a manufacturing business. So you can either go to the one extreme of blowing up babies and whatever in order to achieve your goals, the other extreme of even if we save one life, we can't afford to have any injuries in the workplace. It's like, but then we're just going to kill the economy and not have a manufacturing industry. And if we don't have an economy, people will live shorter lives because they'll be poor. And that matters too. There's all these other considerations that we need to think about.
Points you made. First about American, say, interventionism, you could say, that has been, whether it was good intentions also is questionable.
Yeah.
Eisenhower did talk about the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
So now, even if we assume that, again, not everybody was like that, even if there were good intentions, one of the themes that the Bhagavad Gita talks about, the Bhagavatam also talks about, is that different people have different characteristics. If you see in the Bhagavatam, that there are different groups of people living in different areas of the earth. And it is not trying to monopolize even spirituality or homogenize. There is harmonizing and there is homogenizing. So there has to be some level of harmony. But the very idea of harmony, if you have a symphony or a harmony, there are different people playing different instruments, but they are all going together. But homogenizing is, there's no difference at all. So what has happened is the right tried to not just harmonize but homogenize.
Right.
So the particularities of each place are different. No, I come from India, and in India, I wouldn't say it's always true, but in much of the Eastern world, it is that in the West, the Statue of Liberty is considered to be an iconic image, and that symbolizes that people value liberty the most. Well, it's not always been the case in other parts of the world. I wouldn't say necessarily about India, but there are many places where life is so difficult that people often value security more than liberty. Now, is that a bad thing? Well, if there is somebody who is from Western standards, not a democratic leader, but an autocratic leader, but if that autocratic leader is providing some level of security to people, then you topple that person, and then somebody else who comes up, that person may not be able to provide that level of security, and that leads to barbarism further. So that's why the homogenizing that this has worked for me, and that is what is going to work for everyone. That's also, as I said, it's a form of extremism to think that democracy is going to be the solution for everyone's problems everywhere. So while democracy itself is, you could say, the voice of everyone is to be included, but in imposing democracy on everyone, we might be actually being an undemocratic. So it's like an undemocratic imposition of democracy. That's not necessarily what will work for everyone. So you could have the extremism of democracy also, and that can have terrible consequences. And with respect to the left, yes, it's what you said. I think during the COVID pandemic, there was this tension between lives and livelihoods. So we prioritize lives so much, but not only were the livelihoods of so many people at risk, and we provided, the government has provided various kinds of aids and whatever, but humans are not meant to live cooped up in constricted places. So many mental health problems have come up, so many difficulties in learning and setbacks that children have faced in their growth in learning, students have faced. All that is coming about. This is not to justify any conspiracy theory about COVID specifically. This is to make the point that, when we take one thing and make it into everything, like this is correlating with your point about Australia not having a manufacturing industry because they make it so difficult. Yeah.
Oh, I've lost your sound for a sec. Yeah, I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
now it's back. Yep.
Okay.
Oh, it's saying my internet
So-
connection is unstable. Okay.
Really? Okay.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Ireland is going to slaughter some 150,000 cows in the next 1.5 years because they want to meet their carbon emission and green goals. Now, farmers themselves are opposed. These are not because they say cows emit methane and that's harmful for the environment. But millions of cows have been existing for millennia, and there is ecologically there is a big difference between methane that is produced by organisms that are a natural part of the ecosystem and human-made enterprises. So the idea that meeting a particular carbon goal or this is the absolute value that can lead to huge problems. So you could say that in the past there were the religious traditions which offered animal sacrifices, and we could say no god in human history has demanded or has been offered as huge a sacrifice as the climate god is being offered now. 150,000 animals being killed. So that's extremism. Now, that's their plan. There is opposition, but whether that opposition will work or not, we don't know. So yes, I think that tamoguna influence can come up through various channels. Even good movements can become sabotage. Is that saying, everything that begins as a noble cause, once it becomes a movement, then it becomes a business, then it becomes a racket. So it's unfortunately much of the green movement is now in the stage of a business and a racket. This is not to say that environmental consciousness is not important. Definitely, it's important. But when that is made into absolute value, so we're just rounding off the discussion about how extremism can manifest in any field. So we can have extremism by the right and we can have extremism by the left. So both could be huge problems.
Yeah, I got a few more points I wanted to cover, and then we can wrap it up soon. Just got a bit distracted by a tech issue. Yeah, one important point I think is that's ties into what you were talking about is our confidence in a particular view should be proportional to how much we know about the relevant issues. So usually when you find somebody who holds a very extreme view on an issue or a very black and white view, you find it's the person who heard about the issue from someone else and just believed what they were told, but hasn't actually studied it in depth on themselves and heard from both sides. And anytime you find a person who has studied it in depth and heard from both sides, you'll find they hold a very nuanced, balanced view and not an extreme view, because it's almost never the case that a black and white approach to a subject is true. There's always a bit of truth on both sides. So if people applied this principle and just toned down the strength of their opinion, so, either just don't have an opinion on the issue or have an opinion, but don't push it on other people because you haven't studied it, or study it. And if you studied it and then you know the issue well, then you can have a strong opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. See, there are two extremes. If you consider pendulum, one is to reduce everything to black and white. And that is definitely dangerous. But then you could go to the other extreme of the pendulum and reduce everything to shades of gray. And that could also be a problem. That there are shades of gray and they need to be acknowledged, because we started by talking about how those terrorists, they have a black and white idea that, okay, these babies, because they belong to this community, they should be killed. But we could have the other extreme where everything is a shade of gray. The supporters of the terrorists are saying, oh, actually, they're not bad. So we cannot have everything as a shade of gray. The Nuremberg trials, in that sense, they established this point that even though the Nazis claimed that we were just following orders, and as soldiers, as military personnel, that's what we were trained to do. So, but they said that certain orders, if we as human beings, just mindlessly, pointlessly torturing and killing others, that's horrible. So I agree with you that a little bit more humility, where there is a little more acceptance that I don't know everything, that's very much required. But at the same time, just because there is nuance in issues does not mean that there are no such things as black and white also. So we need to consider both points also. Everything is not black and white, but everything is not a shade of gray also. There is black and white and there are shades of gray.
So one thing that's like sort of tough question that we could discuss is an ethical question around Israel's response to Hamas. So, people in defense of Israel will say they've got Hamas, and terrorist organization, trying to destroy them, and they've got to take necessary actions in order to eradicate that threat, even if it means there's a few civilian casualties. And I don't know if there's an easy answer to that question. Now, is it true that they need to take every action necessary, or is there another way? We just can only really go based on hypotheticals unless we know all the relevant details of this actual situation. But yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy question. I'll talk about three broad points here. Killing civilians is terrible and it should be avoided. At the same time, collateral damage is just a unfortunate fact of war. Wars are brutal. There is a difference between intentionally killing civilians and celebrating their killing, and and killing civilians when others are being targeted. So while Israel is being blamed, and there have been in the history of Israel also excesses, no doubt about it. But at the same time, I am a little, no, more than a little dismayed that no one is calling out the Hamas leaders. They are basically doing two things. One of them is that they are living in luxury and comfort outside of the Palestine. They are living in various other Arab states. And there are others who are hiding in tunnels under the civilian areas, including even under hospitals. So if they are real leaders, they should be protecting their citizens, not offering their citizens as just fodder for the enemies. So this is a horrendously wrong strategy, and I think while there are valid concerns about Israel's specific approaches, but there has to be an equal condemnation of the, not just the, I would say, the cowardice, the downright malice of the Hamas leaders, not just towards it's just even towards those whom they are trying to protect, that they're hiding like that and letting the civilians take the fall for them. So that's one thing. So it's brutal. Now the other thing is that with respect to civilian casualties being avoided, how could it be done? My understanding again is that the world is offering humanitarian aid. That humanitarian aid has to, in today's world, there's a lot of spirit of charity, which is good, no doubt. But there is also how much charity actually reaches the intended targets of the charity. How much humanitarian relief reaches those. That also has to be seriously considered. And Indian history also faced something similar. That in India there were many invaders from different parts of the world who came, and especially several Islamic invaders came from various parts of the world, not just from the Arabic world. Some came from Turkey, some came from other places. But what happened was several of them used a cynical strategy of having they would have farmers and not dairy farmers, you could say, and take hundreds of cows from them and have all those cows right in front of the army. And then the Hindu kings would think, oh.
Unfortunately, that's where the video cut out. I wasn't aware of this historical incident myself, so I did a little bit of research utilizing ChatGPT. What I found is that it appears to have been the Battle of Kanwa in March of 1527, which took place between Timurid forces of Babur and the Rajput Confederation led by Rana Sanga. So the Rajputs were defending themselves. This was quite a notable battle. But yeah, cutting to the point, ChatGPT wasn't able to find specifics about cows. I found one article online which talked about the use of bullocks. It says the bullocks were tied to the cannons, and this prevented the Rajput forces from attacking the cannons because they were afraid to kill the cows. in Vedic culture, cows are considered sacred, and killing cows is considered to be greatly sinful. So, yeah, so ChatGPT is giving a lot of nuance, saying, "Oh, because it could just be folklore, because I couldn't find it in any of the historical texts that I researched. It wasn't on Wikipedia and wherever else ChatGPT looked." However, let's just assume, for the sake of this discussing the ethics here and the principles, that this is what happened. So, let's say the invading Islamic army, this particular army was using cows as shields to defend their cannons from attack. Now, let's suppose the Rajput forces did kill the cows in order to win the battle. Who's responsible for the death of those cows? Is it the Rajput forces who killed the cows, or is it the Islamic forces who were using them as human shields or as artillery shields to defend their cannons? And then you could add to it another layer of analysis, which is, if the Rajput forces were to not kill any cows and as a result lose the battle, how many more cows, or it could be another factor of negative, how many more cows would die as a result? So when we're performing actions, there's some amount of calculation of I'm causing a little bit of pain, but it's bringing about a greater good. This is what happens when we go to the dentist. Of course, maybe we do want to have uncrossable lines of, you just don't commit terrorist acts, or you just don't blow up buildings. So in the case of the example I mentioned earlier of Israel, where, again, just for the sake of this discussion, let's say that this is the situation that Israel is faced with, an existential threat in the form of a terrorist organization utilizing guerrilla warfare tactics in order to try, well, whatever they're trying to achieve, but yeah, they want to wipe out Israel off the map, perhaps, or let's say that's the case, and Israel has to do the needful in order to prevent more terrorist attacks from Hamas. Are they justified in having some collateral damage, some civilian casualties, if that's what they need to do to protect their society, their civilians, from future attacks? I don't think there's a clear answer to this, because, civilian casualties suck. It's a horrible thing. I know Ben Shapiro's got very strong opinions on one side, and just recently he's blowing up in the news because he was criticizing Candace Owens' disagreement. But I don't think it's so clear-cut what's right or wrong here. It's a very complicated situation, and it's just awful all around. It's been going on for multiple generations, for decades. And it would be nice to see some kind of resolution. I think there are examples of other parts of the world where long-standing feuds like this, long-standing warring back and forth between two sides, has eventually come to a peaceful resolution. I don't know how to bring that about, but at least we can call for it. At least we can be wishing for something like that to happen. All right, now I'll play you Chaitanya Charan's closing comments, which he kindly re-recorded for me to put up at the end of this video.
So we discussed about the Israel-Hamas conflict from the Vedantic perspective. And then we discussed broadly 3 points: how extremism is the enemy of humanity, and it needs to be identified, whether it comes in a religious garb or an atheistic garb. Extremism is extremism, and where innocent civilians are targeted, and where they are targeted not just ruthlessly but gleefully, that is a perversity of humanity, and that needs to be condemned. Just because it is associated with a particular religion or a particular worldview doesn't mean that it has to be softened. It is, from the Bhagavad Gita's perspective, extremely tamasic, in the mode of ignorance. Then we discussed how, while everything cannot be reduced to black and white, that also does not mean that everything can be reduced to gray. That just because issues are not very simple. That means everything has complexity, everything has nuances and shades of gray. That doesn't mean that there is no such thing as a wrong that should be unequivocally condemned. And when the attack on civilians is there, that needs to be strongly condemned. And then, so we can have the extreme. One extreme in a pendulum is of absolutism. This is right and this is wrong. That is extremely simplistic worldview. But the other extreme of the pendulum could be the absolutism of relativism, where there is nothing absolute and everything is considered relative. That is also a problem. And we need the center of the pendulum is where we understand that there are blacks and whites, there are unacceptable actions, and then in between there are shades of gray, where we can try to make sense of why people are acting in the way they are acting. And then we discussed about how it is up to humanity, each individual and each group, to choose that how they respond to grievance. When the Bhagavad Gita states that this world is dukkhalaya, that means grievance, distress is unavoidable in life. But from grievance, we can go down a dark trajectory where grievance leads us to vengeance, where we center our life on destroying those who we think have hurt us. And from there, it goes further down to malevolence, where one starts hating not just the particular people who hurt us, but the entire group or maybe all of humanity. Such malevolence needs to be stopped by all means, even if forceful actions are required for that. But we humans have the capacity to rise upward, to choose a brighter path. From grievance, we can move towards tolerance, except that not every battle can be won, except that not every problem can have a solution, and we may have to live with trade-offs. And while living with those trade-offs, while choosing our battles, we can move from tolerance to transcendence, where we can create something of beauty, where we can connect with the divinity within us, and by the enrichment and empowerment coming from there, make a positive difference in the world. If not in the entire world, then at least in our corner of the world. Thank you.
Another point we touched on briefly is about how when you're dealing with wicked people, you have to be cunning. So this is one of my observations from Mahabharata and how the Battle of Mahabharata took place and the various wicked personalities were responded to by Krishna and the Pandavas. What we see is it's not just a blind following of religious principles, even when you're engaging in battle with people who are who are unscrupulous, who are not following any of that stuff. Because, like in a sports match, if you're following all the rules and your opponent isn't, you're going to get defeated. So in order to not have the wicked people win, you need to deal with them appropriately. And this is for the sake of bringing about an ultimate good. Now, I think with ethics, we need to be careful of doing anything and everything in order to bring about a greater good later, because basically, as we've seen with numerous examples throughout history, is that the highway to hell is paved on good intentions. So thinking you're doing something good, but while objectively doing something bad in the present, we really don't want to go down that road. But that doesn't mean there's not some situations where by creating a bit of pain now, you're creating a better future later. And that may be through being a little bit cunning at times. But yeah, I think that these situations are very complicated and people need to stop having such, here's my closing point. That I made. I think that the strength of our opinions. There's 2 points that I want to leave you with, which are two. One of them is we need to see every living soul as equal and deserving of our compassion, even if we disagree with them, even if we think they're evil, and especially we should not be discriminating based on race, religion, or anything based on the body. Because it's the same spark of the divine in every soul, in every body, every living entity contains the same quality of spark of the divine. Even if they're doing evil things, it just means they're covered over by ignorance. And the other point I want to leave you with is I think our degree of confidence in the opinions we hold should be proportionate with the amount we know about the subject. So if you know nothing about the Israel-Hamas crisis, you just heard about it last week, you shouldn't just suddenly be 100% pro-Palestine or 100% pro-Israel. And I think anyone who studies this subject in depth is going to have a little bit of a nuanced view, because the Arabs have been wrong, the Jews have been wronged, so many horrible things have happened on both sides. And there's not a clear right or wrong here. Like, yeah, the other calculation that we need to mention is, say, it's not just like the Israelis blow up a building and there's a few civilian casualties, but they wipe out a Hamas leader. There's also, when you do that and you kill somebody's children, that person's probably going to become a Hamas supporter or a Hamas soldier themselves, because nothing triggers somebody's anger more than the gruesome murder of their children. So anything Israel does as an counter-offensive is going to increase the resolve of the Hamas terrorists or other terrorist organizations against Israel. So yeah, there's really no clear solutions here or resolution. Obviously, any resolution is going to involve compromises on both sides. Commentary I've heard on the subject has said Israel has compromised various times, but the Arabs are always pushing for more. I don't know if that's true. It doesn't really worry me. I just wanted to make a few points about how we need a bit more compassion and a bit more nuance. So thank you for watching the video this far. I appreciate the view. If you like this sort of stuff, be sure to subscribe. Love to know what you think about this in the comments. It's my first time. This is a very delicate subject, first time doing politics. So I'd love to know how you thought I did with that. And I will see you on the next one. Hare Krishna.